Hey everybody, how's it going? Friday morning, we made it to the end of another week, and we are now officially in the preseason zone. Seahawks preseason 8 days away. We're going to have a lot to talk about when that starts, but for the moment, let's stay focused on what we're doing in terms of stuff at the VMAX, stuff at training camp. Well, actually, not a lot to talk about on that front right now either, because we didn't really have training camp yesterday. It was a day off. We did make a couple of roster moves, so we're going to be checking in on those real quick before we move on, but not a whole lot of meaningful stuff here, admittedly. So with that in mind, let's just go ahead and talk about what can be talked about. So we let a player go yesterday afternoon. Darvin Kidsy, wide receiver. I know he played with Washington at some point, and I don't think he ever caught a pass for us. I don't think he was ever active for us at any point. So this is certainly no surprise. He was definitely one of the receivers on this 90-man roster who I felt had no real path forward unless they completely dominated camp. And even then, it's just really hard. I know we don't have tremendous receivers at the top of our depth chart, but the depth of our depth at receiver is actually at least interesting. Not just Eskridge, but you've got K. Johnson, now you've got Penny Hard, who people are talking about. I still like Aaron Fuller. Some people are still up on Ursua, and Ursua's done more than Kidsy, so there just wasn't a whole heck of a lot going on, even after we had to let Tamori and Terry go. So Kidsy, just no real path forward for him here, so he was let go, and that takes us down to 90 or 89 players on the roster. So we do now actually have an open roster spot, and while I know that some people will think this is a prelude to signing somebody like a KJ Wright or a Richard Sherman, or maybe even an Olivier Vernon or Russell Okung, and those things may be possible, but let's take a look at who the Seahawks are actually kicking the tires on so far. All right, so to my knowledge, we are bringing in 2 players for tryouts to take the roster spot of the released Darvin Kidsy, Mikel Jakobsen, and Lakiem Williams. I probably butchered both those names, but, well, we all make mistakes. So let's talk about these 2 guys as much as can be talked about, because these guys are not former Seahawks. They are not former big-time NFL players. They are not the veterans with an established track record of success that some people may have been hoping for. They are not guys who are likely to make the team. They are guys with extremely long shots of making the team. The best they can probably hope for is to impress somebody enough to where they can get brought back mid-season if somebody gets hurt, to maybe fill out a practice squad spot. So the stakes are relatively low here as far as us as fans go. But these 2 guys, let's talk about what can be talked about with them. So starting with Mikel Jakobsen, because he might be the most interesting of the 2. He played his college ball at Nebraska and Iowa State. However, he played college basketball. He was a 6'9" forward for the Cornhuskers and then the Iowa State Cyclones, I think it's the Cyclones. So yeah, we can talk about what he did in college basketball. 11 points and 6 rebounds a game in 2019. Shot a high percentage, had a little bit of range, but yeah, that doesn't really mean a whole heck of a lot to us now, does it? So Jakobsen, and I'm using the pronunciation that I believe is appropriate if he is indeed Swedish with that name, so I think it's Jakobsen, is trying out as a tight end, so it would seem. He certainly would not be the first former college basketball player to transfer to the NFL as a tight end. He was a high school football star and actually got some scholarship offers to play football, but he chose to play basketball. So it's not like he's never picked up a football before. And it makes some sense why you might look at him and go 6'9", 240-pound good athlete. Hey, this guy could be the next Antonio Gates. This guy could be the next Tony Gonzalez, right? Next Jimmy Graham. But I find it a little interesting that this team is sweeping around under every nook and cranny trying to find some super freak tight end when, according to my sources, the tight ends that we have have been maybe the most appealing part of training camp so far. Everett, Parkinson, Disley, those guys are supposedly killing it. So it's kind of interesting that we're putting so much work in trying to find the next quote-unquote Antonio Gates. And I have to believe that any tight end we get with this roster spot is not going to have any real chance of making the roster. But then again, you could say that about any player we could get. So I'm certainly not complaining about it, but I find it interesting that we seem to be so invested in finding a freak tight end. As for Lakeem Williams, he was a linebacker at Syracuse, did not play last year. 2019 was really the only good year he had in college. 110 tackles, 4.5 sacks, and a forced fumble. The interesting thing about Lakeem is that he was actually born in Tacoma, which is like, what, half an hour south of Seattle? Fairly close to where I am. So he definitely has some history in the area, if not with the team. So that might be part of the reason why we're bringing him in. I don't know what his chances are of making the roster, but the fact that this is a linebacker we're talking about here may indicate that, combined with KJ Wright getting a tryout with the Raiders yesterday and supposedly being looked at by a couple other teams, it might indicate that if the Seahawks decide to bring in another linebacker for depth, it's not going to be a veteran who's going to actually cost something. It's going to be a guy like this who costs nothing and will expect nothing. A guy like KJ Wright will expect to be played. He will expect to get on the field. A guy like Lakeem Williams won't expect anything. As for what can be said about him as a player, not a whole heck of a lot. 6 feet flat, 226 pounds. Pretty slow 40 time, even for a linebacker. Not a whole lot to say about him as a project. I know he was part of a pretty good Syracuse team that one year. I know he had some pretty productive games for them, but he doesn't strike me as anything more than a special teamer. That's really all I can go with on this one. He's, again, the odds of him making the team are very, very low. He would need John Radigan, who, by the way, actually is fighting through an injury right now and is not practicing, to completely wash out or have to go serve his, do his terms of service in the Army or something like that in order to have there be even a chance of him to make the roster as a sixth linebacker. And then he might need somebody like Ben Burke-Hervin to wash out and get cut. So a lot of stuff needs to happen for him to have any shot at all. I don't think either of these guys are going to be here for much longer, but what little can be discussed about these two, I tried to put it out there. So you guys let me know what you think down below, if you think anything at all. Who do you think we're going to use the open roster spot on? Are we going to bring in a veteran, somebody who actually might make the team, or do we just bring in a guy like a Lakeem Williams, somebody to just hang around for a few weeks in all likelihood? All right, I'm going to get out of here. Peace out, go Hawks. Hopefully some more compelling stuff to talk about later today or tomorrow. But for now, Darvin Kidsy is gone, and somebody else is moving in. We just don't know who yet.